Hi, welcome to this fourth video in our series on praying the Labyrinth. Today we're going to talk about listening, the spiritual practice that I often use as I am exiting the labyrinth after having spent some quiet and still time in the center. But before we begin, I want to share with you a reading from the book of Proverbs, the second chapter, verses 1 through 11. My child, if you accept my words and treasure up my commandments within you, making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding, if you indeed cry out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, if you seek it like silver and search for it as for hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk blamelessly, guarding the paths of justice and preserving the ways of his faithful ones. Then you will understand righteousness and justice and equity, every good path. For wisdom will come into your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. Prudence will watch over you, and understanding will guard you. This practice of listening is a spiritual practice that may feel new or perhaps a little uncomfortable for many folks in Western Christian traditions who are more used to experiencing prayer as talking to God. Silence can be challenging for people, but also active listening can be challenging for people as well. We may struggle because we're not used to creating the stillness that listening requires. We may struggle because we have certain expectations that have been set up in our minds about how God will speak to us, or what God will reveal to us, or how we will experience certainty about God's communication with us. Sometimes we have expectations that don't get met, and then we're either disappointed, or we're worried that God isn't speaking to us, or perhaps we're afraid that we're not faithful enough, and that's why we're not hearing God. One of the first steps in listening is to set aside all of those fears. Everyone experiences this path of the journey in their own unique way. When we are listening for a word from God, it may be in response to the prayers that we have lifted. It may be not related to the prayers we've spoken at all, but a completely different experience. As you begin your path outward from the labyrinth, it is important, as always, to begin this piece of the practice with just a few deep breaths. Again, prepare yourself, center yourself for the journey of the path outward. And again, we're going to start this portion from the center here and then retrace the path all the way back out. And just as you did when you were entering the labyrinth, you want to do this portion slowly. You want to take your time. You want to feel the portion of the path that you're in and not focus on where you are going. One of the things that is helpful, again, for listening, this is obvious perhaps, is to create that silence in your inner mind, in your inner voices. Silence the inner voices as best as you can. And then instead of thinking of nothing, focus on receiving. It's just a slightly different space than you were in at the center of the labyrinth. Focus on receiving from God, on opening yourself to God. A lot of times people describe experiencing a lot of thoughts picking back up in this portion of the labyrinth. They start talking to God again. They discover that they're doing that again, and it can be hard to maintain a listening stance. When I experience that, I find that sometimes it's helpful to use a chant of some kind to, again, return me to that place of listening. Sometimes I'll use that very simple chanted meditation. Open my heart, open my heart, open my heart, open my heart. Sometimes people will repeat a chant like that and just continue it going in order to keep other voices that are very busy more at bay. Sometimes people find that using a line or a chant from a hymn, for example, that one, using that intermittently can help still the other voices that are becoming busy in their head and will help them return to a quiet listening place. Do whatever works for you. Use a favorite line of a hymn that helps remind you of placing yourself before God's presence and being receptive. Do a phrase from Scripture if that helps you listen to God. Listen to your children praying. Any of the easy Taizé pieces or other refrains from hymns that you know well that will help you just still yourself again and listen for God. Another thing that it's helpful to remember is that when God communicates with us, it doesn't always come in the ways that we are used to receiving communication. You might not hear words in your head. Some people talk about colors coming to them, an overwhelming sense of a particular color, or sometimes a smell, or sometimes a memory, or sometimes an image of a peaceful space. God communicates to us in all kinds of ways. So open yourself up to what you are experiencing and don't limit God's communication to just one of the senses. Don't limit it to thinking that you'll hear a particular voice or a message in words in your head. You might experience a feeling. You might experience, again, a smell or a memory. You might experience music or the refrain of a hymn. Any of those can be God's way of communicating back with us. Sometimes it takes a little practice to be aware of what messages God sends to us. In all of this, though, regardless of what you experience, I hope that you feel a sense of God's presence with you. If you don't, that's okay too. Sometimes that comes with repeated practice of these spiritual disciplines that are new. But whether or not you feel God's presence, I assure you that God is present with you. God is speaking a word of love for you. God is offering you courage and hope and strength. God is offering you mercy and peace. There are a lot of things that God says to us every day that we forget to hear or sometimes we can't hear, but the message is always there. And eventually, as you continue spending time with God, you will probably find it much easier to actually receive the message of love and grace and courage and mercy and call that God is sending to you. I pray that you find, again, blessing in your journey of walking with and listening to your God and our God.